Hello. Today we're going to be pairing Mistaken Identity Cake with North by Northwest. North by Northwest is a film about mistaken identities, and so we're making a cake which you could mistake its identity for a steak. We're also going to be serving it with chips and mayonnaise.
Delicious.
Both in inverted commas. Right, there I've heated up 50 millilitres of milk. You just want it warm because it's going to be to activate some yeast with a pinch of sugar. So you don't want to boil the milk or even get it too hot because that'll kill the yeast. And then we're using 2 grams of yeast that I'm measuring out. You don't need to be super specific here, but get close to 2 grams, otherwise it might taste a bit yeasty.
What kind of yeast are you using there?
I'm using fresh yeast, actually. I could just buy some in Morrison's, surprisingly, but you could also just use that sort of dried yeast stuff. And then that was 55 grams of flour and 20 grams of caster sugar and 1 tablespoon of oil. Mix it together, and then I slowly add the milk. Now, the recipe I was following makes for a very wet dough, so you'll find that I ended up adding way more flour later on. So here's me mixing, and then I get my scraper, and at this point I realise this is not a dough, this is a liquid, and so I add quite a bit more flour. Basically, I was going for almost a bread dough consistency, sort of until I could pick it up. At this point, it was still a little sticky. I basically wanted to knead it until it no longer clung to my palm. So I was pushing it through, and I could tell at this point that it was sort of sticking to my palm. So I just added in some more flour from the side. You can see me doing that there. A little more flour on there. Basically adding it until it no longer is lifting off the surface with my palm.
How long did you need it for?
I needed it for about 5 minutes, and then added it to an oiled bowl, covered it with cling film, stuck it in the airing cupboard for maybe 2 hours actually, and you can do this while you start doing all the other bits.
Yes, excellent. So now we have our cake. Going to butter a 20 centimetre baking tin and persuade Owen to line it with baking paper because that's my least favourite baking job. So he's sorting that out for me very kindly. And then to the cake itself. So we have 85 grams of non-salted butter with 85 grams of golden caster sugar, and mixing it together, creaming it together to make it super light and fluffy. As you can see, I kind of gave up on the electric whisk there because judging it by hand is sometimes easier. And then adding eggs. So I actually didn't halve this recipe properly. I did too many eggs. Here I did 3. I think 2 would have been about right. So basically what eggs do is add structure to your cake, help things bind together. So in this instance, for what we were making, it kind of worked out okay, but 2 eggs would be plenty.
Yeah, you kind of want a steak in inverted commas to be sort of pretty solid and meaty, don't you? So it did end up quite a meaty steak, not as light and fluffy as your average steak, but still pretty close to the theme.
Yes, of course. And so here we have half a teaspoon of baking powder and 85 grams of flour whisked together, and then folded into the mixture we have so far, just gently, because at this point you don't want to knock out all the air you've incorporated by creaming the butter and sugar together. And this is a tablespoon of coffee, which I've brewed, a full tablespoon, as Owen told me to do. So this will make a good sort of colour for the outer sides of the cake, sort of lightish brown, hopefully.
Could probably have gone more coffee in the end, couldn't we?
Possibly, but it didn't taste too strongly of coffee. And then you put it in the tin and bake it at 180 for between 12 and 15 minutes. Sort of check it after 12 because this is a fairly thin cake. If you wanted to make this as a proper coffee cake, you would make double the quantities, which I've said, and then halve them and put some buttercream in the middle. So then you just get it out and test it. I'm just seeing if it bounces back initially, and then inserting a skewer to see if it comes out clean, which it did. It really didn't take too long to cook.
Right, and then you have to cut your steak shape. So I went for that classical sirloin steak. I think if you went for a fillet, it would just be a very small round cake, and it would be a little harder to identify. So I went for that kind of sirloin / rump kind of shape. And then here's some epic knife skills. Whatcha!
Slicing deftly.
Flippy, slicey. Yeah.
And then you have a bunch of leftover cake to deal with as well.
Now the idea is we wanted our steak to be medium rare. So we trimmed the middle, so cut through the middle. And then we're going to soak this in a raspberry puree, which I make with frozen raspberries. So I just tipped out, I think that was 250 grams of frozen raspberries, maybe 500. And then I add sugar by eye, because we're gonna taste as we go, and then enough water just to coat the bottom so they cook a little quicker. You're gonna taste as you go along. You want it to be sweet, not sharp. It was probably about a third sugar to raspberries, I reckon.
And did you cook it for a while? Or?
Yeah, basically brought it to the boil, let it reduce down, let those raspberries completely sort of, as you could see earlier on, I was pushing them against the side to check they were soft. But we're going to blend it anyway. But they're very cooked, and they've released all their sort of juice now, and then we blend it up.
The initial blend. There are stages of blending, right?
No, there was just the one blend, but then you pass it through 2 sets of sieves. Now, in the background in a second, I'm going to wash up that blender. So I'm sieving that through to just to save washing up. That is a washed blender, you can see. Because then it comes out here, and didn't want you to think that we would just transferred it back into the blender that had all the seeds in.
Oh, good point. Yeah, and then, so this is our medium rare, so we're going to soak the cake briefly in the raspberry puree. There is a sort of minute or two where we leave it to soak to make it be pink in the middle.
Yeah, you don't want to soak too long. I think it came out perfect, didn't it? Because it will continue to soak while...
Yes, once you've sandwiched it together. Yeah. And this is going to be for the chocolate icing. So I was fairly approximate with this, but I think I did about 100 grams of white chocolate. This is bain-marie, so boil up some water in a pan, put a bowl over the top, recognise that your pan's a bit wobbly and switch to another one. Basically, the first one was warped, so that wasn't very convenient. But using a bain-marie will make sure that your chocolate doesn't burn, because burnt chocolate tastes horrible.
And what was that second chocolate? Was that dark? Or
that was dark, yeah. So dark chocolate, that was probably about 150 grams, and we did have some left over, but that can just be used for hot chocolate.
And then we add the white chocolate to get the right colour, yeah?
Yep, to get the perfect colour.
And what colour are you going for?
Steak colour.
Steak
colour, you know? Yeah. And then we realised that greaseproof paper will make this whole situation much less messy. So spooning it on top, kind of using a palette knife to try and make it as smooth as possible. You want a fairly generous amount, to be gentle as you can, because otherwise the crumbs from the cake will sort of come up and invade your icing, and that's less pleasant and won't look quite as steak-like. So this is mega messy right now. It will look better in a moment. Probably.
There we go. And then here's me coming in with a fork to give it kind of that protein texture, that sort of grained texture. There we go.
And what are you doing with those Oreos, Owen?
I'm going to eat the middles as a little snack.
Only the middles? What will you do with the outer bits, though? Well,
we kind of want that kind of griddled style of steak, because that steak that we've got there kind of looks like a steak-shaped chocolate log. It doesn't look too steaky at the moment. So what we're going to do is we're going to put little griddle strips, and the black of the shell of the Oreos is perfect for that. You don't have to use Oreos, but you want to use some kind of black biscuit. Now, what you don't want to do is fold it into a little bit of paper and then try and make a little line.
Little funnel you tried.
Because as you can see, Jess is like pulling off the over thick line I made. Instead, you want to just do it carefully.
Just do it carefully by hand.
Yeah. Right, so the dough is rolled now. Rolled it to about 2 centimetres. That had been rising for maybe 2 hours until it had doubled in size. Then I trim off the ends, and to make it sort of, because we're going for chips here, so steak and chips, so these are the chippy bits. And then if you look, I cut diagonally so the chips are different lengths, you know, like you would get from a normal potato. And then cut them into strips. They're going to rise up, so your strips need to be a little wider than they are thin. And then I just place them on a side. And again, they're going to rise for about 2 hours. I think in the end I only raised them for 1 hour. There we go. That's looking a little more steaky. Right, heat your oil to 170. Stick your chips or donut sticks, whatever one you call them, into your oil. And you don't need a time really. It probably was taking maybe 1 or 2 minutes. But basically you're looking for colour. You're looking for that colour specifically, a kind of golden brown. The first ones I did, I actually overdid, so you probably want slightly less golden brown than that because they continue to cook once they're out of the oil. That's the perfect colour. But then if you see those lighter ones there, the actual perfect colour, they're the ones that I took out a little early.
Don't forget to sprinkle the sugar/salt on top. I mean, you want sugar because they're donuts, but you can pretend it's salt. So the steak cake has been in the fridge for a bit to set the chocolate icing. I probably should have left it a bit longer. It's still a little sticky, as you can see. But here we are doing the fat of the steak.
Yep. And then the mayonnaise is actually chantilly cream. So you pour out your cream. I'm doing it by eye. It probably ended up being about 150. A couple of little drops of vanilla essence, a tablespoon of sugar, and then you whisk. Now, the first time I did this, I made butter, so don't over whisk. When you think it's done, you've probably done it too much. So stop just before you think it was done, and then you get a really nice sort of thick mayonnaise-y type cream. That does look really good, doesn't it?
I'm hungry
there we go.
now.
And that's steak and chips.
Yeah, exactly.
Or
Oh, delicious steak and chips.
Mistake cake and chips. And here's the little cross section. Here's why you went to all the effort of that raspberry. There we go. That's a perfect medium rare steak. There we go. And then we cut from Jess to me eating it. If you notice the little hands. Okay.